For someone whose entire career has been focused on joy, why a podcast on pain? Because these stories need to be told. A good phoenix rising out of the ashes story reminds us all that not only can we survive, we can thrive. And when we emerge, we're different. That's the alchemy of pain. Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Alchemy of Pain podcast. This is where we focus on people who've gone through some really tough stuff, but they didn't stay there. They went through. We're going to talk about the valley part and also how they got through the valley to new light in their lives. And I love the fact that I'm not just interviewing people who are well-known names or who you could Google and see they're all over YouTube or social media. They're real people just like you and me that we can connect with and find similarities in our stories. When I met my guest today, I had no idea the bond that we were soon to share. He is the father of my former next-door neighbors. And I remember learning that his wife had passed away. And I felt so badly for him. I had just lost my mom. So there was a bit of a bond there. But then shortly after, my partner died suddenly. And with all the well-meaning people, and I honor them all for their kindnesses, it meant something to have a friend who had had a similar loss, though different, a similar loss. And so it's my honor to introduce you to Walter Hayes, my friend, who is an artist. He is an avid reader. He's a retiree. He's involved with so many different things. And his tunnel experience helped me through my own. So welcome, Walter.
Thanks, Brenda. It's good to see you again.
And no, you're
You
now
moved to
we're on two different coasts now. We used
yeah,
to
you're a
be.
West Coaster and I'm an East Coaster.
I know. And I remember, obviously you didn't live in Florida where I lived, but you would often visit your daughter and son-in-law, and of course the little grand boy. How wonderful. But I remember that period of time and learning of your loss. But, before we go there, you're a man of many interests. Paint a picture of what your life is like right now.
Well, before we got on this Zoom call, I had to put my tile cutter away because I'm renovating a bathroom. I think this is the 10th house that I've renovated. This house that I live in now that we live in is 123 years old, and I've done a lot of renovations on it. We have a studio over there, which we're converting into a real studio, as well as a gallery, and we're hoping to open up a gallery here soon, so people can stop by and get pastel landscapes, which is what I do. And living on the water, there's no shortage of subjects to draw and to get involved in. So I really love that. Art is something that's a big part of my life, and fixing and building. Our neighbors here, we have a ton of wonderful neighbors. And they're just great, and they've absorbed us immediately, and then we've got new neighbors that keep coming in. So this big group, and it's a lot of fun, and it's a great time
So
in
here
my
you
life.
are saying it's a great time in your life.
Yeah.
And could you
Yeah.
have imagined 3 years ago?
Never imagined 3 years ago I'd be here. I put a lot of work into to get where I am right now, and I love it. I'm turned 70 years old this year. I feel young for 70. There's a lot of years left, and my late wife died 3 years ago, and I knew that I just couldn't live in the past. I had to move forward. And I think that's a critical point that you may hear from me several times today. Don't live in the past. You learn from the past. The past is over. What's done is done. You can't change it. You can think about it, but you don't ever let it run your life. Because you can't change it. You can't change the future either. So you live for today and live for now and what you can do. That's what
And, I always say that the point of these interviews isn't to just focus on those tough times, but to paint a picture so that people can see themselves. So, though your wife made her transition 3 years ago, she had been ill for quite some time, hadn't she?
Yeah, so let me tell you the story that I'm going to tell you, and then I'll tell you the story, and then I'll tell you some of the highlights, okay? How much time do we have, by the way?
As much time as you want to give me.
Okay, fine. So, my wife of 45 years passed away, ovarian cancer. It took about a year and a half from diagnosis to when she passed. And during that time, I grieved a lot. And after she died, I decided I had to do something new with my life. I was not going to just sit around. And I went online and found a mate, and I have a girlfriend that I really love, and turned into my fiance. And we're actually going to be married in 4 weeks. We'll be married here at home. It's been a big transformation in my life. It's very been positive transformation, and a lot of really cool things are happening. So that's kind of the story that I'll tell you.
Well, that is definitely the Reader's Digest version, and you got to the good part really quick, and I couldn't be happier because it makes one hopeful that if you set an intention and you do the work, like you said, not only did you find a new life, you found new love, and you're rebuilding something beautiful with, and we can name drop Priscilla because she is absolutely lovely in every way.
Yeah, she's a sweetheart.
When you found out about your wife's diagnosis, what were the feelings, and how did you share them together as a
Well,
couple?
we were in the office with the doctor together, and he said, "I think you've got ovarian cancer." And I remember very distinctly that Anne, my late wife, she just hung her head and she went like this. She said, "It's the worst kind." Being an RN, she knew, and it's the worst kind because it sneaks up on you undetected. When she was diagnosed, she was at stage 4 cancer, and so she was well along. And you know, it's it's like, okay, the CA word. Now, what do you do, right? So your life is never going to be the same, and it's going to change. And very quickly, she was in chemotherapy, and then later that summer, she had surgery. Um, After surgery, I called the surgeon and I said, emotionally and intellectually, I need to know what's coming. You've been through it many times. Tell me what to expect here. And he did. It was a good conversation. And basically what he did is he laid out 3 scenarios. The bad scenario, the better scenario, and the really good scenario. And the bad scenario was like 1 to 3 years of life. The okay was maybe 5 years. And then the best one was you get better and you just keep on going. She very quickly followed the worst scenario. And so I knew quickly that she was not going to live through this. The question you didn't know was, how long will she be ill and when will she pass? So knowing that and coming to that in my mind, that was a huge loss, both of the life that we had at that time and looking forward, what's going to happen then. And so all I saw was change and loss of what we had. We had just moved into this neat house on the water. So I started
It was,
grieving at the point.
it was a sucker punch to a dream. And also, I want to honor the fact that it was her dream as well. And were there any warning signs? I mean, stage 4, had she been having some symptoms?
Uh, Looking back and reading now about ovarian cancer and the symptoms, she had all of those things, but they're mild and they kind of pop up here and there. The big one for her was her back hurt a lot. And she had a large tumor when it was diagnosed. But yeah, so it was tough on her. And being a nurse, she knew what was coming. And she actually had been a cancer nurse, so she took care of a lot of cancer patients. It was tough. And she had chemotherapy. Then she had pretty extensive surgery. There were complications upon complications after that. And then she had chemotherapy and more chemotherapy and more chemotherapy. And there were some early indications that the chemo was working. And she was going, yeah, we're going to beat this. And she was very optimistic about it. She was very religious. And as a result, she was convinced that she was going to make it through it. She was positive about that. And never wanted to talk about death. And in not talking about death, there was a whole chapter in our lives that never finished, if you will. And it was really difficult on me. When I finally got her to talk about death, she woke up one morning. She said, "Oh yeah, death. Yeah, let's talk about death. For my funeral, I want this, and ask Father to do this, and da 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 da, and have them blah 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 blah, right?" So it's like all this list of things, but it wasn't those life things that our long relationship. And that was huge. I didn't understand that whole thing. It kind of gnawed at me for a long time because she wouldn't talk about that. And then after she had passed, and you go through that really heavy grieving stage. You and I have talked about this. Grief is nothing but loss. It's all about loss. Okay, it could be loss of a dog. It could be loss of a job. It could be loss of a dream that's no longer there, or a goal that you worked for 20 years and finally got it, but now you don't have that goal there anymore, and you grieve and you don't know why. It could be loss of a spouse. It could be a sudden loss. It could be a slow, agonizing loss, but it's all about loss at the bottom. And after she passed, I thought it was pretty good. But you get these waves of grief that they're tidal waves, they just wash over you. And I remember several times walking in the evening and a wave would hit me. And my son, I learned so much from him. He's smarter than I am. I'm very astute. Anyway, he said, just go with it, Dad. So what I did was I let the wave wash over me, and I just felt it, and I didn't think about it. I just felt all the emotions. And I took time, dropped to my knees, whatever was felt right, and I just felt everything, and just got a good sense of that. And when it was over, I felt a lot better, right? And I can't explain it other than don't overthink it. Just let it flow. And so I had that several times. And then one day I'm out for a walk and I'm going like that. I thought, said, wait, she's gone. She's gone. She's dead. She's not coming back. She's like week 2. She's not coming back, right? My life as it was is not ever going to be the same. So what are you going to do, Hayes? You're going to be moping around and, wishing for the old times, or are you going to do something and get your life back on track? And to me, I wanted to get my life back on track. As I went through that whole grieving process while she was ill, and I cried a lot. Ian, who's again wiser than me in many ways, he said, "Tears are nothing but your soul cleansing itself. So don't worry about it." So I let them flow. They want to come, let it go, right? And I got over the grieving fairly quickly. But it's good. But when I realized that and life's never going to be the same. I said, I got to do something. And one of the things I had thought about was I'd like to fall in love again. And I told my sister, while my wife was still alive, I said, when this is over, I want to feel love. And I described it. I said, you remember when we were teenagers? You know, do you remember that sense, or when you were in college and you had that new girlfriend? And I was like, oh, this is just a wonderful feeling. And when we were first married, going through that, you remember all this. It's great. It's great times. And I just wanted to go through that. And so I worked on that. I make that happen.
When you say you worked on that, what do you mean? Because I think everybody's taking notes now, because everybody wants to feel that feeling if they are not with someone. I know I sure do.
Well, if you're going to fall in love with, again, you've got to find someone. Where are you going to do that in the middle of COVID? And I knew I was going to have to go outside some way. So I went online, and we had done marriage preparation for a bunch of couples when they were getting married, and some came through that had met on eHarmony. I thought, okay, I'll get an eHarmony account and log in and just see what might be there. And I was kind of disappointed. Sitting out on the front porch one day, and my neighbor Mitt next door, who was divorced, said, "Well, no, Walt. She's no. You're doing it all wrong. Don't go to eHarmony. You go to Match.com in Washington. That's where all of the women are." Oh, okay. So he said, "I'm coming over tomorrow night. I'm going to show you how to do that." And he brings his laptop. He sits down. He said, "Look, you go do this, stuff." And I found a woman on Match.com in 5 weeks that I really liked. Her name was Priscilla Whidden-Dunn, and she had spent 5 years on Match.com trying to find the man that she liked. So 5 years, 5 weeks, I lucked out. She keeps telling me that I really lucked out. She's right. But we met and, did the typical texting, and we had a date. And we went out for lunch, and she said all the right things and did all the right things. And it was great. I loved it, And I got a really strong vibe from her. So
yeah, well, I would say so, because you're going to get married, but
yeah,
we're recording this before the wedding, but probably by the time it runs, you will be Mr. and Mrs. So, okay, there are people that truly are rooting for your happiness after a loss, but also quite ready to judge if you get a little too happy too quickly. I remember going on my first date after Mark transitioned. And the date said to me, "You have no business dating. It's too soon." And I remember thinking, who are you to tell me what's appropriate for me? So can you speak to this whole judgment thing? Did you face any pushback from well-meaning friends and family?
yeah. Let's talk about that, because that's really important part of this. You live your own life. I live my own life. People will judge you, and they will judge you based upon their assumptions and their opinions. Okay, and what they do. Right, and I'm going to digress. And you make sure I come back to this point. Okay. Um, it's important to know that through this whole process, I wanted to explore my, let's call it spirituality, if you will. So I started reading, and one of the books I picked up was one that you had mentioned when you did a eulogy for Mark, called The Four Agreements, and I loved it. I really liked it a lot, and it came on strong, and I enjoyed it. So I read a couple other of his books, and then my daughter, who lived next door to you, said, "Here's another book, Dad. Why don't you check this one out?" And it's called Living Untendered, the Untendered series by Michael Singer. And he's got a couple of books. They're really very strong, very good. Some people would say consciousness level raising kind of a thing. It helped me a lot And I remember reading Singers and thinking, why don't they teach this in high school? But you don't hear what he talks about. And then there's another book, the follow-on is called The Power of Now, that takes an even stronger look. And this, I have discovered a lot of people really love it, and they go back to it year after year after year and read seconds. It's full vision. The essence really is that of these books, it's all about living in the now, in the present, you know. And we hear a lot about being in the present. You got to be present. Okay, so what does that mean? And I think Eckhart Tolle really talks about it in The Power of Now best. But living untethered, set it up, staged it for me. And that is that, you know, we think about the past, we're a victim of our past, we're a victim of the future. And we think that we are all of those things that are going on in our mind. We have these thoughts that are going in our head all the time, right? And so that's who we are. That's what you guess, but that's not who you are. And this is the awakening that I got out of all this. Who I am is the being that's the watcher. I'm watching all of that stuff go on in my brain, where I rehash the past and I stew about the future. And I think about all these things and I go, oh God, it was so awful. Why did I let that happen? Oh God, you know, and you just go into this agony and you wallow in the past. All right. So the essence of this is you can't change the past and you can't change the future. You, me, I'm a little teeny speck in this grand universe that we're getting a great look at now through these new telescopic photos, right? Here's a speck. I can't change the universe. The future is going to be what it's going to be. I have no effect on that. What I have, only the effect that I have is what's happening right now. Now, between you and me, I can't change the past. So why stew about it? Why wallow in that over and over and over?
It's like wasted energy.
Totally wasted.
So,
And so when you think about that and you think about the fact that your brain, okay, spends a lot of time churning, and you think that's you, but that's not you. You're the one that's kind of sitting back and watching all of that stuff go on in your brain and seeing all that happen. And the way you free yourself from that is you become the watcher. You just become aware that you are doing this, that you are thinking about it, doing about the future. You just become aware, and what that does is it centers you and brings you to the present, where you can actually do something. And that's the whole essence of these books, and it's great, and I love it, and I wish that they would teach this in
well,
high
those are
school.
great recommendations, good recommended reading for anyone that's facing any kind of a challenge in their lives. But you told me to take you back on the rabbit trail, which
Right,
was pushback about you deciding to be happy, and in some people's estimation, a little too soon, perhaps.
right. So, you know, I'm going through all this kind of stuff and thinking about the past and say, I can't wallow in the past. And then, so I'm excited. I meet Priscilla. We're going to go to Maine. We go up to Maine for a week, right? And I take my pastels, and every day we go out and I draw, and we take a bottle of wine. We have a great time. Super. But in the process, I was going to stop and talk to her and introduce her to a family member. And I got a call the next day. I actually got an email. It said, it's too soon. You can't do that. We don't want to meet you, her. And it stopped me because, you know, here I'm excited, getting my life back on track. And I wanted some affirmation from family that, yeah, this is good, right? And instead I got this total pushback, and I didn't understand it. It took me months to understand that what had really happened was that they were not ready. It wasn't me.
So
And they were not ready, and therefore,
they projected their unreadiness onto you.
yes, right. Which made them feel better, right? As soon as I understood that, It was like, okay, I really don't care because that's their problem. That's not my problem, right? I live today to now, right? They're living in the past, and this whole thing about death and dying and what you can do and what you can't do. These are all wives' tales. Then hardly any of it's rooted in fact. The only thing I think is really good and solid is don't make a life change in your first year. You lose this stuff. It's just there's just too much going on, and that is good advice. But too soon, nah, forget that. Live your life and do what you're going to do. If it feels right, do it. Going out with Priscilla felt right. It felt right for her. It felt right for me, and we just kept going. She brought me a lot of joy, and I just kept going with that. So why not? And we have.
I love that story. And I just want to interject too that when I met Mark, it was not long after my marriage had ended. And there were many people that even questioned my integrity in the whole thing. Boy, am I glad I seized the moment. And we had,
Yeah.
even though they were abbreviated, we had 4 great years because I followed my heart, not what you can't live by fearing what other people think of you.
Right. You have to live your own life. You set your own goals and you live your own life. And you work towards those goals. And from time to time, you look back and you say, did I meet that goal? Well, yeah, maybe you did. Maybe you didn't. But in working towards it, you accomplished a whole lot of other things. And you say, you know what, I didn't make that goal because I changed it. And that's perfect. I changed it. And then I moved ahead from that. Right. And so you just keep moving. You can't stay still. This life, change is constant. It's rampant. You just go with the flow.
Well, you're a great example of someone that has built a brand new life. But I hope you don't mind. I want to go back to one thing that you said, which I think is an interesting point of conversation. You and your former wife never talked about death. Yeah. My mother would not talk about death with me. I feel like having those conversations is such an important gift that you give the people that are left behind.
Yeah. So I have a story.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I have a good friend, Lucille, who lives in Baltimore, and I help her with household chores and renovations and whatever all the time. But we're more friends than we are, and we always get in these fairly deep conversations. One day she calls me and said, my friend is moving. She's got a desk and she's going to give it to me. And we have to take it apart and take it over to my son's house. Can you help me do it? Yeah, sure. So I meet her and her friend is Ann Tyler, the author. She's got a wide variety of books, very popular. And so we go in and Ann makes me a cup of coffee and we're standing around in the kitchen. We're just chatting, and Lucille, my friend, says, Ann's husband passed away from cancer as well, and he would never talk about that. And I looked at Ann, and she started to tell her story. Very same story. Just wouldn't address death and leaving the world and the end of the relationship or anything like that. And it was very good for me because she expressed what I was feeling. And it was great dismay, really, that your mate of 45 years wouldn't talk about the relationship over those years and wouldn't say how much she loves me and you'll be fine when I'm gone and, take care of the kids or whatever, and I just felt it was missing. And the next day I'm home here and Priscilla and I we're in here drinking coffee. And you went to see Ann Tyler, the author? Oh my God! Again, if you were gone, I would have gone with you. And I said, yeah, well, you know what? We talked about her husband and how she really didn't get any kind of closure from that. And I said, closure? that's what happened to me. I never got closure of the 45 years of relationship we had. We were never able to talk about it and wrap it up and kind of bring it through.
Yeah.
And when I understood that whole cloud kind of lifted. I just immediately accepted it. Okay. Now I understand it. I didn't get closure on.
Acceptance.
It was huge, but I didn't know what to accept. And not until I got that word closure and tied it into the 45 years of relationship and all those great times we had, did it make sense to me. And then I just accepted it. And as soon as I did, the cloud lifted, and I thought, so much fun. And I have left all of that behind.
Beautiful story. I'm so glad I circled back to that. And
Yeah.
the conversations that we have with people do help to give them closure. But when you can't get closure, acceptance. I think that's a beautiful story. And I could talk to you all day long, my friend, but I know there are some things that you might have on your list, because you are a preparer, you are a reader, you are a researcher, you are a preparer. So what have we not talked about that's important in this conversation?
Well, Priscilla and I talked about this conversation a couple of times, and she'd say, well, make sure you remember, you talk about this, or this is an important part. And there were a number of things that she brought up, and I think that are important, that I'm going to go down through them. One of them is, when you build a new relationship like we did, it takes work. It takes work. Okay, it just doesn't happen. We would sit on the couch early on in our relationship, and she would read a chapter from Ruiz's book, The Four Agreements. And we'd be going through it, and we'd stop and we'd say, what do you think about that? I mean, it's kind of a weird sort of thing. It's different. And then we talk about it, and we go deep quickly, right? Those topics took us deep. And then I'd read the next chapter, and we'd do the same thing. So we went through a couple of his books, and then we went through some of the Untethered books, portions of Untethered, in the same way. And it was really good, because it forced us to talk about our personal feelings and how we feel about things. And you got to go deep, down in your heart, how you really feel. And there's a way to do that I also discovered through this whole process, and that is, you have to make yourself vulnerable. Okay, so vulnerability is an important aspect of this. And what do I mean? Is that you need to share parts of yourself that you're not so sure you want to share with anybody, because maybe you're a little queasy about it. It's a little too personal, right? But if you share that, you make yourself vulnerable, and the listener, will pick up on that vulnerability, and oftentimes will come back to you with an equally vulnerable story of their own. And it happened here on the front porch one time, and I was telling a friend of ours in the community that I had this vision the night before Ann died, and I was telling this whole scenario, and it was a little risky to share that. And then after a little bit, he shared that he was gay, that he had only told 7 people in his entire life that he was gay. And so he shared this vulnerability back to me. Of course, I knew that he was. It was pretty obvious. But the fact that he actually came out and shared that was important for him and for me as well. So the point here is that if you make yourself vulnerable, you share parts of yourself, and you're not so sure you really want to share, it will come back to you many times, manyfold, and you will learn from it. Your personal relationship will strengthen, and your relationship with that individual.
I like the fact that even though you had a 45+ year marriage over your shoulder, you approached this new relationship with a beginner's mindset, with, all right, this is a chance. This is a new chance for me to do this a new way, perhaps. The deep conversations that you and Priscilla have are a foundation on which you can ride the rest of your lives together, having that being a foundational principle.
Yeah,
You won't
and
be
it is.
afraid to have those deep conversations.
And the result is that we can talk about anything freely and openly. Okay. And I will share that I did not have that in my previous marriage. There were just certain topics that were not going to be discussed. But there's no boundary. And it's very liberating. That's great. I'm loving it. And so we talked about finding closure and vulnerability. I think there's one other point we might make about grieving. Grieving is individual. What worked for me wouldn't have worked for you. What worked for you may not work for anybody else. You had a certain relationship with the loss, or the person, or the dog, or the car, or whatever it was. No one else shared. You are your own set of beliefs and understandings. And so the way you approach grieving is uniquely yours.
Mm.
I didn't know really anything about grieving. So I decided I'm going to read. I'm going to find out what it's about. And I went to the New York Times readers list and all of the authors that review all these books. And I said, what's the best book on grieving to the New York Times authors? And they came up with a couple. And I picked up one of them, and it was wonderful. I read it very quickly. I got absorbed in it. I learned a lot. Some of it was it just didn't apply because the topic. That helped a lot, and reading helped me a lot, as you see. The power of now, the untethered, all those things, and I had, when you go through a situation, you got time. So you take time to restart, to renew, to give yourself new tools, and that's what reading does.
I remember, when I had gone through my loss. First of all, the first package I received in the mail was a book from you, which meant so much to me, because that's your love language. This is how you show you care. These words meant something to me. And I remember I gave you a book and you're like, it didn't really work for me, which
Right.
speaks to your point about how grief is individual. What might comfort one other person may not do it. But the point is that you try. You may not hit the mark. People grasp for the right words and sentiments and actions. But the fact that you're even trying means the world to the recipient. Absolutely. So with that, I want you to speak to anybody watching who is perhaps caretaking for a beloved spouse, who is readying to make their transition. And in a way, you made your own as well in this life. What words of advice would you give that person as they are grieving the loss even before the loss?
Well, it's grueling. It's very hard. It's physically and mentally exhausting. And you must take care of yourself. If you don't take care of yourself as the primary caregiver, you cannot give the proper care to the individual who needs it. So you have to take time out. You have to take a break. Okay, you got to find a way to do that. I think as you're going through it, you focus on the person you're giving the care to, but you also need to think a little bit about yourself and what you want and what you want to do. And it may not come clear for a while, and that's okay. But it will come clear. And then when it does, take the necessary steps to move and act. There are several people in my life that I could name but won't, that looked at me and saw me out dating and having a great time and said, my God, I got to do that, right? Somebody here in the neighborhood, I need to do that. Lost his partner for years and years, went out and got a girlfriend, and they're having a blast. Others have were in this state of denial of moving their life forward, and were just wallowing in the grief. And you could see it going to their homes, and it's dark and dingy, and oh my God, it's like, open the blinds, you could bring some new light.
Mhm.
And after they saw me with Priscilla, we got to dinner and had a great time. It's like, whoa. And then he calls and says, hey. And I said, okay, so it's okay to move ahead and do it, right? Do it with gusto.
I love that. My mom was widowed at age 37. My dad died of a heart attack. He was 15 years older than her, but when he died, so did she in a lot of ways. She never ever dated, never developed other hobbies. And believe me, I mean no disrespect to my mom, but how I had wished that she had decided to keep living. And I learned something from that I hoped that I would never have to apply, but I ultimately did. When Mark died, I had to say to myself, I remain breathing. I am still here. So clearly there must be something for me,
Right.
something for me to do, something for me to experience, something for me to be. And so for anyone listening or watching today, I say, you are breathing. Your life.
Yeah, I think you can't get stuck in the past and live there. You got to move forward. So I told you what I was going to tell you, and I've told you, and I'm going to tell you what I told you. Okay? If you want a new relationship, you got one. Grieving's individual. People are going to tell you what to do. You do what is important. But my lesson was to feel it, okay? And feel it and go through it. Just don't put it off. Just go through it and feel it all. You can't dwell in the past, right? No wallowing. Decide what you want, move on. Read, learn, get new tools, new tricks, find out what's going on. Closure to that relationship is important. Find that closure somehow so you're not left open, and be able to accept what was there is important. And as you move ahead, you can make yourself vulnerable, and it does work. That's
Well,
good
you're
results.
living proof. You are proof that it works. Walter Hayes, thank you for gifting me with your time today. I know that your story is going to make many other people think, maybe read, smile, and
I
give
did.
hope. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you
Right.
so much for your time. And thank you for tuning into this edition of the Alchemy of Pain podcast. I hope that you were inspired. And if you know someone who has made it through a dark place and come out the other side with a story to tell, I want to tell it. Send them my way. Thanks so much and have a great day.
Thanks, Brenda. Good to see you again.